Hi, I'm Diana.
And I'm Zach.
And we are The Farrier's Bellows, a podcast dedicated to bringing you games and tools to take your adventures further.
We're going to be talking about non-traditional indie RPGs, some that have been around for years, others that are newer, to take you beyond the ordinary.
Today, join us as we discover something new in A Quiet Year.
Our first segment is The Call to Adventure. The Quiet Year is a game by Elixir.Other. It was released in 2013 when it won the Most Innovative Game in the Indie RPG Awards. The Quiet Year is a map-making game in which players play the part of an entire community. You play starting with a blank piece of paper in the center that everyone is going to contribute to and build off of in order to develop this town, village, city, living in the post-apocalypse and struggling to come together to survive. The game is played out in weeks over the course of a year, and players play to discover what happens to their community together, working together and often finding themselves at odds when it comes to desires and motivations.
The way that this game sort of mechanically plays is that you are using a deck of cards, and each suit corresponds with a season in this quiet year. Each season has a different theme or a different focus to kind of move the plot along for this year. Each individual card in the whole deck has two options for what is possibly triggered. It could be good news, a bad sign, new projects or issues. Each player, when it's their turn, takes a card, chooses an option, reads it out loud, and does the thing. Then they have the option to either start a new project, start a discussion, or discover something new on the map. This goes around until most of the cards are drawn. The game ends when the Frost Shepherds, or it's a specific card, when they come. And you've got this map at the end of it to kind of show your journey.
So Diana, what are some things that you liked about this game?
I really enjoyed having two choices for every card. It really helped set the tone, especially early on. The choices that someone else would make would influence the choice that I would make, and that would continue on, and you could kind of feel it as the game went on. When the next season would start, you could kind of guess, for the most part, which choice somebody was going to make because of choices that had already been made, which I thought was really cool, but not necessarily. Like, anyone could pick any choice at any time, and it would still fit with the story, which I really liked. So you've got these two choices, but they're so open-ended that it fits with any story that you're telling. But it's enough of a guided starting point that someone who struggles to come up with ideas won't struggle to come up with an idea.
Yeah, you've talked a lot in previous episodes about how you like to have a lot of structure in your games, a lot of scaffolding support as a player to give you ideas. So this is definitely a game that does that. Did you ever feel, I guess, at a loss of what to do with anything?
No. Which I really enjoyed about this game, because even if I couldn't quite figure out what I was going to do with my specific card, because I could kind of guess where I think the story might go for the next season or whatever, even though maybe you couldn't, I just feel like maybe I can, because I have that idea in my head.
So you would know how to build up with other people, like the threads that other people were building. You even if you couldn't build off of one of your threads, you found it very easy to connect to other people's.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. And so with the options that were given to me, I was like, okay, I feel like I know where to go from here. Mm-hmm. I never felt like any card I was given threw me for a loop. I felt like they were all kind of connected.
Yeah, the Oracle decisions, the prompts, are very clear. They're very well written. They're really evocative. One thing that I really liked is that the structure of the Oracle overall is really wonderfully done. It has a very intentional flow that's even discussed about in the rule book about how sort of you're starting with a period of discovery as you settle into this new place.
Right.
And then as spring moves into summer, into fall, you're dealing with sort of trouble. You're discovering issues that the community is having, and then that ultimately culminates in a struggle for survival, trying to survive the elements and one another. In addition to the flow of the Oracle, the prompts are really well written. They're really evocative and they're very interesting. And because they're so interesting and they're so vocative and intentional. They come together to create this very cohesive story every time you play. One thing I will say is that every game I've played of this has had elements that come up in the community and then get dropped because we can't find a way to tie them back together.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I don't find that is a bug so much as it is a feature, right? Stuff happens in communities that either gets forgotten or swept under the rug. That's just something that really happens. So it doesn't, even though from a story space, it can kind of feel unfulfilling to sometimes have elements that you don't ever figure out how to work in.
Right.
It feels normal and real anyway, in the way that I really like.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. Some of the prompts are more directed than others. Some of the prompts are, like a new person comes to town, or some of them are like, you see a good omen. Like that, to me, is a very wide spectrum. They offer a lot of different things. And so I think it makes sense that there would be things. And I mean, I've played the game with you, like I know, that things come up because you're trying to answer this prompt, or you're trying to discover something new, or you're starting a new project, right? That you just don't focus on after you've done it because you felt like you just needed to do something for your move, or because you thought it would be interesting, but it turned out it wasn't. But this game moves so quickly. There's not like a ton of downtime in this game. Like you're doing something, and then when you're done, somebody else is doing something. And there's not like there's not that back and forth that you get in other games. So even if you've come up with this thing that you're not like super happy with, or that you don't think will necessarily go anywhere, that's okay. Something new's coming up pretty soon, which I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the kind of fast-paced nature of this game, even when you're taking time to stop and think, because you can't have those conversations and that back and forth for this game. It moves very quickly.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about why you can't have that back and forth?
Yeah, I'm bad at not talking.
Well, we haven't gone over that rule.
Oh, you're not supposed to talk when it's not your turn. Sorry. You're not supposed to talk when it's not your turn. You are not supposed to engage in conversation. So the only time really that you engage in any sort of conversation is with the start a discussion move. And even then, you make a statement and that's it. So if the person after you is like, no, I don't think so, you're wrong, and here are all the ways you're wrong, you don't get to rebut that. Rebuke? You don't get to tell them that they're wrong. You don't get to be like, here are all the ways that you're wrong. That doesn't happen. You make your statement and it's over.
And that is the only time that the entire table is allowed to talk about an issue at once.
Right.
Otherwise, when it is your turn, you are acting on the behalf of your portion of the community, which is a shifting sort of idea. It's not like you don't have like a solid, I represent this section of the community. It's just like, when it's your turn, some members of the community get this thing done,
right,
or do this thing, or believe this thing.
Right.
Everyone else just has to sit and accept that,
right,
which is it's a little rule, but it is a powerful one.
Yes.
And I think we will talk about that a little bit more when we approach the Inmost Cave.
I agree.
I feel like we say that a lot on this show. We'll talk about that later.
You know what? I don't think that's a bad thing, though. I mean, maybe it is. You guys can tell us, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I really like this rule because I struggle with it. So I'm like Diana, not the character, or I guess the character, but Diana is sitting there seething that, how dare you build the longhouses where I was going to put a cave? How dare you? But I can't share any of that. And so I'm like seething, and it adds to the game. I don't know. It adds to the game, but it also adds to the spookiness of it. Like these big things will happen from the prompts or from a discovery or something. These big things will happen and you can't react until it's your turn. And so if it was the player right after you and you're playing with a table of 4 people, like it's a couple turns before it comes back to you, and you have to process all of that and still move this journey along. And I really liked that struggle. I do. I really liked that struggle. But I will tell you, I have broken that rule in every game I've played multiple times. I try not to. I do try not to, but I have a very hard time not talking.
I have played games of this where no one obeyed that rule, and it is a much weaker game than when everyone tries to obey the rule. The game that we played specifically for Farrier's Bellows to get like some shared experience under our belt and refresh our memories, we stuck to that rule pretty well.
Yeah, we corrected people when they didn't do it either.
Yeah, like it was only you, me, and our editor, Zach B.
Yes.
It was just us three.
And you all corrected me when I broke the rule, so it's fine.
But we stuck to it pretty well, and it sings so much better. You feel the emotion of this game so much more when you are in good faith trying to engage with that rule.
I agree.
And we are getting way too close to approach the Inmost Cave at this point. So I think the last thing that I want to talk about before that I like about the game is the project die resolution mechanic. So when one of the things on your turn is that you can start a project on the board, things that your community is trying to get done. And this is actually a moment where everybody can kind of like feed in, but it's very brief. You say, I want to build a chicken coop. And everyone decides, okay, well, I think with our resources, that would take you about 3 weeks to get done. That's a long time for a chicken coop.
It's a very big, massive chicken coop. You've got heaters, you've got a whole system, internal watering. It's a big deal.
And then you just set a 6-sided die down up to the number 3, and each turn that ticks down by 1. And once it's finished, the person who proposed the project gets to like say how it finishes, how it turns out. It's very simple. It's very minimalistic. There is not a lot mechanically to it, but it does enough to get you invested in trying to get things done and struggling to get stuff done. There's never enough time to do everything that you need to secure your community. And it just kind of like sets that down and then gets out of the way for everything else to happen around it.
Yeah.
It feels very narrative. It fits very well into the sense of watching a community with a bird's eye view, that I just think it's this wonderful little mechanic that works so well.
I agree a lot. I also like that it's just a very simple, I like that. I like the cleanness of it, the simplicity of it. It's just nice. I don't know. So did you have any questions about anything?
I actually have 2 questions. The first is, what's the best way to like make connections and make a coherent narrative versus just trying to exist for a year,
right.
Which is how I felt some games of the Quiet Year have gone for me.
Right.
It kind of just feels like everybody's kind of doing their own disparate things. And
it's like a series of events as opposed to a cohesive story.
Yeah. And I feel like as I've played more, and especially as I've played with smaller groups, that narrative gets a lot tighter. It feels a lot more, it feels a lot better, while still having that kind of like everybody's kind of trying to survive and everybody's doing what they think is best for the community.
Right.
It still like makes a good story. So I wonder what is the best way to make sure that everybody's trying to work together to tell a story, even if they're not trying to work together for the community.
Okay, yeah.
My other question is, what is the best way to use the move discover something? So one of the 3 things that you can do on your turn is discover something. And when you discover something, you are announcing that something happens in the narrative. You have complete control over it. It's not something that is randomly generated. You just say, as it sounds, we discover something. I struggle a lot with that move, to the point that I very rarely use it, because I feel like, so the rules say whenever things seem too controlled or easy, we can use this action to introduce new issues and dilemmas. So you can use it to introduce new characters, introduce sort of opportunities. Some of the examples include mangy wolves have been slinking around the woods. There's a broken down water wheel a mile upstream. Strange wailing noises come from the forest at night. A self-declared prophet arrives. I have a lot of trouble using this move because it feels so counterintuitive to harm the community that I'm trying so hard to keep alive.
Yeah.
And the Oracle already does so much on its own to harm it. So it feels very counterintuitive to bring in more problems, but it also feels way too easy to just create solutions with it.
Which is always how I end up using it. I've stopped discovering something because I kept doing that. I kept being like, oh, well, we discover machinery that we can use to conveniently. It's exactly the kind of machinery we need to fix this thing. Like I kept doing that kind of instinctually. And so I had to stop myself from discovering something new. I ended up starting a lot of discussions and building things.
Yeah, those are the two moves that I use a lot more because they're just a little bit easier to do. I find it very hard to walk that line with discover something new that allows you to present opportunities without solving problems or necessarily like directly harming you. So I do usually try to do like, okay, this is something that we might be able to start a project around, but even that feels like it's too easy. That feels like, even if I say, okay, well, there's a busted up windmill that we can't use right now, but in 3 weeks we'll have whatever, power, grain, whatever. It feels too cheap.
Yeah, I get that.
So I really wonder what the best way to use that move is, and if anyone has any tips on how to use that move better. So is there anything else that stood out to you?
So I really love watching artists draw. I very specifically like watching you draw, but that's neither here nor there.
Weird.
Whatever. I just like watching you draw. That's not the point. I like watching artists draw because I like watching them start. Like it starts with a line and then it turns into like a face all of a sudden. And I love that. And this game feels like that. It starts with a couple lines and a couple corners. And then at the end of it, you've got this map and it became this beautiful thing, like line by line, very slowly. You don't see the whole picture forming until it's done. And I really, really like that feeling. It really felt to me like an artist drawing from start to finish. And I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, artistically, it's this beautiful process where at the end you have this shared artifact of your game in the form of this map that everyone has contributed to, that everyone has drawn on. And it's so beautiful because everybody has their different styles and everybody has their different ways of indicating things, and it just all comes together in this wonderful little piece that you have at the end of your game, which for me usually ends up getting lost in a pile of paper somewhere. But
you keep them. I don't think you need to keep them.
But you can't throw them out.
I think you can. I think you can Marie Kondo this, right? Like you can appreciate it for what it was in that moment, and then you can thank it and you can let it go.
That's true.
Because you don't need papers everywhere, Zachary. You don't need them.
There.
But it is cool that you get this piece of kind of like memorabilia.
Yeah.
Anything that stood out to you?
Radio towers. Every game I've played of The Quiet Year has had a radio tower cult. And I don't know why it happens. It's not in the Oracle anywhere as far as I can tell. It's just something that everyone does for some reason. There's always a radio tower cult.
To be fair, I introduced the radio tower. I did not introduce the radio tower cult.
I don't remember who introduced the radio tower cult in our game.
I always want to guess it's you. If there is a cult somewhere, it is a pretty sure bet that you started it, but I don't think you actually did.
See, you would think so. You would think I'd be the one to start the cult, but I'm so sick of the radio tower cult. Yeah. That's not true. I love the radio tower cults. I just don't know why they always happen. They always happen.
They do.
So it is now my goal to make sure that it never comes to fruition in a game of The Quiet Year that I am in again.
So mission for everybody else is to make it happen around you.
Just immediate radio tower. So Diana, is it now time to approach the Inmost cave?
I think it might be.
So Diana, what is an issue or theme that we want to talk about with The Quiet Year?
I think that we can agree that this game touches on and surrounds itself with and tries to do very well community. The idea of it, the building of it, the living in it. One, all, none of those things. I don't know. We had a quite heated discussion before we started recording about this, but we agreed that community was a good place to go.
Yes. So we agree that this game is about community.
Yes.
I think where we disagree is, I think, what the game might be exploring surrounding community. Is that fair to say?
I think that is very fair to say.
So community is this, the more I think about it, the weirder it becomes as a concept to me. And without getting too navel-gazy, I started thinking about how community is this condition in which we live, in which we interact, survive, and build as a collective. It's this weird, complex idea containing concepts of governance and morality and ethics and psychology. It's this concept of living together and having relationships with people, having a connection, either consciously or unconsciously, for the betterment of ourselves and one another. And this concept is way bigger than I think I can intelligently talk about. But that's what this game tries to explore, right? It's the way that human beings interact with one another. It's the way that they are forced into situations in order to survive together, and not just survive, but live together. And all of the things that entails, from infrastructure to government to survival. And this game is not the only game I've ever seen that tackles community as an issue, but is arguably one of the most popular, I would say, and is one of the most interesting, in my opinion, at least that I've played. And it does a few things in order to kind of explore this idea of community and the sometimes very fulfilling and sometimes very unfulfilling ways that those relationships happen.
It's got this non-collaborative decision-making process, right? Like, you can't talk when someone else is talking, and that person is making the rules and is shaping this world and is doing the things for this community, and you don't really have a say, except for these discontent tokens, which is how you get to be petty. And that's my favorite. I love being petty. And so you can't argue with this person and say, I don't like that you're building longhouses. I wanted to live in tents. Like, you don't get to say that. What you get to do is take a discontent token. So they can visually see that you're pissed and you don't agree. And in a community setting, right, like in the real world, that would be like rumblings or rumors or maybe town halls or something. People voting against you, right? Like, so that's what that would look like in the real world. But in this game, it is a visual like indicator. I'm not happy with the way that this is going and we are at odds. But that non-collaborative decision making is a way that a community can be built, and is definitely a way that this game decides to build community.
Yes. And the discontent tokens are an amazing little mechanical bit, because they aren't really mechanical at all. When somebody does something that annoys you, you take a discontent token. And it is always a wonderful moment in the game where someone does something and everyone else at the table just makes eye contact with them and then reaches over and takes a discontent token. And that person knows that they messed up. And no one has to actually say anything. So no one is like voicing their discontent. So you don't really know why you messed up all the time.
Yeah.
Just that you did something that bothered someone else.
Yeah.
And you can take a discontent token for any reason. In narrative, out of narrative, whatever. And then you get rid of discontent tokens sort of at your leisure.
Yeah.
The two quote unquote mechanical reasons to get rid of one is because someone did something that you liked, or they rectified the problem and you can return a discontent token, or you can do it to act selfishly. And the thing is, you can act selfishly. You don't need a discontent token to act selfishly. It's just this very petty way of saying, well, you pissed me off earlier, so that's why I blew up the cave so that no one could go exploring in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Which is a thing that happened to my cave. Just want to say. I made a cave and then it disappeared.
I forgot I did that. I didn't want anyone exploring. I actually forgot that was a real example.
That was a real example. I was very excited about my caves, and you got rid of my caves. Discontent token.
There was something bad in there. There was
nothing bad. People just disappeared.
So we had a little bit of a disagreement over whether or not communities actually
are built this way.
Are built this way.
I feel like communities are built much more collaboratively. Even if it's just the leaders being collaborative and the underlings or the other people, the common folk, whatever. If they don't get a say, they're taking those discontent tokens. But I still feel like there's more collaboration than there is dictatorship, which is what this game does. It hands over its little dictator cap every time you take a turn, which is fine. And it is a very interesting way to build this community. I just feel like that's what's happening.
I think the very definition of dictatorship means that there is not a dictatorship cap that gets passed around.
I know. Right? Okay. But I can't think of I'm sure there's a better example out there for what it is, but
But so that's why I do feel like it has that collaborative nature, because you're not playing a character or even a sect within the community.
That is true.
When it's your turn, you are playing the community. So we're all playing the same people. It's just the movements and the whims of the community at that moment in that week. To me, it doesn't feel like, power is getting passed back and forth. It feels like the people who are winning are trading wins. You know what I mean? And to me, that feels very much like how a community functions in general.
Mm-hmm. That's I don't necessarily agree, but I understand your intellectual point. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I just think communities are more collaborative.
Well, and so the way that you can be collaborative is through the discussion move.
Yes, which I loved. I used that one very frequently.
I like the discussion move. So when you make a discussion move, there's two ways to do it. Either you start with a statement, and you just get to say your thing, and then everyone else gets to say a thing.
And then that's it. You don't get to say another thing.
Or you get to ask a question, and then everyone else gets to answer the question, and you get to answer last. And when you make a discussion move, you only get like one or two sentences to say your piece, and you're expressing the general feelings of some group within the community, some individual or group within the community. And it's just a good way to kind of feel around what your fellow players, and by extension what the community is feeling about a certain issue.
I know when we played, there was like a new person that came into town, and through our discussion move, that new person was kind of like exiled to the corner of the map. But it was through our move. I know that the person who introduced that character would have integrated them, but through the characters' discussions and the community's town hall meeting, essentially, which is always how I kind of pictured this discussion. I always kind of pictured it like a town hall.
Yeah.
That person was kind of exiled. So like it does have an impact. That move does have an impact on the game and the way that the community reacts to certain issues.
And it's partially town hall. It's partially like an abstraction of the idea of, the rumors spreading through the community, whisper down the lane sort of thing. But again, just because you have that conversation, like you said, just because you have that conversation doesn't mean that you're going to get your way. No. We had a conversation where somebody sabotaged a project, and I remember fighting very passionately about, reforming them, and we can help them, and we'll just, make sure it doesn't happen again. We'll keep an eye on them, but we'll reform them. And then on Zach B's next turn, he killed that person.
Yep.
And I was livid.
Yep.
And could only take one discontent token. Would have taken more if I could, but I could only take one. But I think that to me is such a beautifully minimalist and bird's eye view, right? It's a beautifully removed abstraction of how communities function, because very frequently you do get to say your piece, but you don't get to have the final say.
Yes. I just think there's a little bit more compromise. But here's the thing. Everything that I'm saying is my beliefs on how I think a community functions, but this game doesn't do that, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
like it doesn't matter that this game doesn't do that. This game does what it does very beautifully, I think.
It's not a simulationist game, right?
Exactly.
It's not trying to simulate a community. It's trying to tell the story of a community.
Correct. And all of the mechanics that it has do that really well. And I think if you added more compromise and more back and forth conversation, it would muddle the story. The story wouldn't be as interesting, and it just wouldn't be as interesting. The game wouldn't be as interesting. So even though I completely disagree with your opinion on how communities are built, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter. This game builds that community. Even if it's doing it in a way that I don't necessarily think actual communities are built in, it still builds a community, and it still builds that map, and that is still fascinating.
Yeah. I think the last thing that I think we want to talk about with its community building is the way that random events kind of play into it. Mm-hmm. You have a little bit of choice on your turn over what happens, but really it's all very random in terms of the order of which things happen, which things actually happen. Mm-hmm. There's so much that's out of your control. You are not playing as an individual person who's trying to survive or who's trying to succeed or who's trying to save. You are just playing as people, as this collective, right. Looking down at this map. I always visualize it as like an RTS game where I feel like I can see the little people like walking around on the map. This game would be amazing with like augmented reality tech. Oh my god, it'd be so good if you could just have little people floating on the table and like doing their little things.
Ugh, you and your technology. The thing that I like about this game is that in every post-apocalyptic story ever, there is someone who betrays the others for their own survival, right? There's someone who kills somebody else. There's somebody who steals the food. There's somebody blah, 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 right? You don't do that in this game. There might be like a blip of a character who does that very quickly, but you are playing the community. You are not playing a character surviving. Mm-hmm. You're playing a whole community surviving. And I think it's interesting that it through the very nature of the game, it omits that very popular trope.
Yes. The game builds itself as a year of relative peace. Mm-hmm. You are not going to necessarily go on raids or have any combat. Mm-hmm. There's just going to be a lot of strife and disagreement, and weird things are going to happen. Bad things are going to happen, but they're things that the community can come together to try to solve through conversation and through diplomacy and through exploration rather than combat. It is a very non-combative game in general.
Which I also very much like.
I think in our Fierce Bellows game, we had a little bit of an issue where there were raiders on the outskirts, but we kind of just circled the wagons and were okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't even think that they made very much of an appearance there. They left a mark, but they themselves didn't really make much of an appearance. Yeah. So you are dealing with conflict. You are dealing with things that are out of your control, which I love. But you're also dealing it in the way that, in general, a community does. Mm-hmm. And like you said, with a rejection of what is frequently kind of seen as post-apocalyptic tropes of violence and control. Yeah. Is there anything that you would want to tinker with this game? Making it more collaborative. Having those collaborative conversations to build your community. Because I really feel like communities are built collaboratively, as a Diana opinion. But I do wonder how this game would change if decisions were more collaborative. If there was just like an element of that. Well, it would change. It would certainly change the game.
Yes. It'd be a different game. But also, this game gives you the tools to make it completely collaborative.
It gives you a tool.
Yeah, which is all the tools you need.
That's true.
On your turn, you could spend your turn hosting a discussion so that everyone gets their say on a new project. But what happens then is that nothing gets done because you're all trying to discuss and make sure that everyone is happy. And when you try to make sure everyone is happy, nothing actually gets done.
Well, there has to be that balance.
I know.
You make a discussion and then you do a thing.
I know, which is why I think that this is so wonderfully designed, right? Because you can't get weighed down by bureaucracy and trying to make sure that you're going to make the whole community happy, because you're never going to make the whole community happy.
You're right. But you could include their thoughts in more of your decisions before you blow up a cave, Zachary.
But that's a player problem, not a design problem, in my opinion.
I think your opinion's correct. I just wonder what would happen if it was more collaborative.
Well, we'll see.
I mean, the thing is, I like this game. I really don't have very many I don't have very many questions. I don't have very many concerns about this game. I like this game. I like the game the way that it is. I like the games that we've played so far, I've very much enjoyed. So I don't really want to change it. But if you're going to tell me that this is how a community is built, I'm going to fight you, is what it is. So
it's an abstraction. One thing that we talk about in a lot of episodes that hasn't come up yet is sort of the new player friendliness
yes.
level of a game.
I find this game to be very new player friendly.
You do?
I do. Because every card that you pick is 2 choices, right? And if you are a new player and you're kind of scared about this game, like everything is a choice, right? Like you're picking from a list. You're not creating things out of thin air, which I mean you kind of are, but you're still given a list, like you're still giving that scaffolding, right?
Yeah, you're given a clear prompt.
Exactly. So you've got these choices for the card. You make your choice, you expand on that story. Or, like you just read the prompt and you're like, okay, this done. And if that's your turn, then that's your turn, right? And then you make one of those 3 choices. And if you're a new player, you start new projects every turn. I'm going to build a well. I'm going to build housing here. I'm going to do this, right? Because you make the statement, you put a die, you walk away from it. You don't have to do anything else with it. I do think that this is a very friendly, new player friendly game. I don't know that it's a brand new to role-playing games ever friendly game, but if you've got, I don't know, a Dungeon World experience under your belt, or I know we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but if you've played the Yogg and then you play this, like I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I think you could play this game. What do you think?
I agree. I think it's very new player friendly.
Yeah.
The prompts are really strong. The rules are short, and they ask you explicitly to pass the rule book around and everybody reads a segment together. So you are intended to, when you play, make sure that everyone together has a hand in explaining the rules to everyone else, which I think is a really powerful collaborative move to make sure that everyone feels like they have ownership over the rules.
Yeah.
So I could definitely see someone who has never role played before having a little bit of hesitancy engaging with some of the more improvisational aspects of the game.
Yes.
But this has far more scaffolding than a lot of other games that we've talked about that are kind of similarly in the same realm.
I agree.
So I think this is a very, very new player friendly game.
Oh, yeah. And, and the truth is, if you're playing with a table of new players, that no talking rule goes out the window and you get to be a little bit more collaborative when you're struggling with an idea.
No, I disagree with that.
No, I don't think everyone's like, oh, this rule doesn't apply. I think you're just more inclined to be like, I'm having a lot of trouble. These are my choices. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you're just more inclined to do that. And if you're all playing with new players, then you kind of learn to do that improvisation. You learn to do that as the game continues, which I like. I don't know. I think it's a great game.
Yeah. Our third segment is Return with the Elixir. So these are other pieces of media that we think explore similar ideas, similar themes as The Quiet Year that we would recommend. Diana, what do you have?
I have one thing because you stole my other thing.
This one's wild to me.
Okay. It can be wild to you if you want it to be, but I think it makes complete sense to me.
Okay.
Then it kind of goes back to that imagery of the artist for me. I am recommending Canon in Verso by Paolo Mornseg. I should have practiced saying his name. I have no idea how to say it. Mornseg. Anyway, the book is Canon in Verso. It's about a violin. It's got a violin on the cover in its musical terms. I bring it up because it is a thriller. And don't laugh.
You say that like that's so obvious. What's the connection?
I'm about to explain the connection.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Thrillers give you a clue and you have no idea where that's going, right? Like you have no idea. This thing has happened. You think that's a little bit odd. And then another thing happens. And you're like, that's a little bit odd, but I don't know how it connects to the other thing that's a little bit odd. And it continues and continues and continues until, oh my God, it was the redhead in the kitchen with a knife, right? Like, I don't know, clue. I don't know it. Right? Like you put the pieces together until this full picture comes together. And I have read exactly one thriller in my life, and it's that book. And it was good. I remember liking it. So that's the story. I really liked that book. I read it years ago, but I really did like it. But it to me, thrillers, and this book in particular, because I remember being very surprised by the ending. Like I couldn't guess it. It's all about like those little pieces coming together, and at the end you've got this beautiful story that's been told like bit by bit. And I know that's how all stories are told, but that's specifically how thrillers are told.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah, no, I'm not wrong. There you go. I know I'm not wrong. It's a good book. I read it years ago, so if it's problematic, I read it years ago. I'm just putting that disclaimer out there. I read it years ago, so.
Okay, all right.
But what about you? What would you recommend?
I have a few. My first touchstone is a video game, actually, called The Yawg, YAWHG. This is one of my favorite video games. It's a game that I've introduced to a lot of people. It's beautiful.
I love it.
It's by Emily Carroll and Damien Sommer. And it's sort of like a visual novel a little bit. And it is much different than The Quiet Year in that you are playing as an individual person, but you're playing as an individual person in this city that you as the player know is going to be destroyed in a few weeks, but your character does not. So you're playing as your character, you're deciding what they do every week, and do they go out and party? Do they work a job? Do they try to do good for other people? Do they try to hurt other people for their own benefit? And each week you decide what your character is going to do within the city, as you, the player, know the city is ticking closer and closer to total destruction.
Right.
Similarly, in The Quiet Year, you are living as this community, and as players, you know that at some point during the winter, the frost shepherds are going to come, and your community might not survive. But the people in your community don't know that, and they're just trying to survive. So there's this there's the turn similarity, and B, there's this concept of the difference between player and character, and this time limit, and what do you do with the time that you have.
Right. I love The Yawg.
It's a beautiful game.
If you hate The Quiet Year, still play The Yawg. I'm just being serious. Like it is visually beautiful. It is story-wise beautiful. It's a great game.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
The Quiet Year is also a great game, but The Yawg is also a great game.
I also want to touch on another tabletop role-playing game called Dog Eat Dog by Liam Lewinog Burke. This is another game that's about communities. It's one that we will probably play for Ferris Bellows at some point. It's one that I think I might have mentioned on the show before. Dog Eat Dog is a game where all of the players except one are playing as an indigenous community, and one player is playing as the community of colonizers / invaders who have come and taken control over the land that the indigenous people are living on. And it's a very dark game, but it is also about community. It's about how communities survive and struggle. And it explores very similar themes of not only playing as yourself, but playing as playing as a group of people and trying to survive. That is also an excellent game.
I've never played that one. I can't confirm it, but it is. I don't know if it's a famous game, but you've talked about it so much that for me it's a famous game.
Yeah. Yeah, I talk about it a lot. Are there any specific stories that you'd like to tell with this game?
Not really. It's more of an element thing. I wonder what the game would be like if everybody agreed on what kind of technology was available. Every time that we've played so far, it's been primitive until there's like one new high-tech thing, right? Like there will be four-wheelers all of a sudden when everything was built out of wood before, or there will be a radio tower when we haven't had any sign that there was any electricity anywhere, right? And we've never played a game where we had a conversation about what sort of technology would be available beforehand. And I wonder, one, if it would change the game, if it would make it more interesting or more difficult. I don't know. Like, would it be interesting to play this game where you had an abundance of super futuristic technology, but maybe not a power source for it, right? So like you've got all these cell phones and all these parts, but there's nowhere to charge them. There's nothing to do with them. Or it's super primitive. There's no metal. There's no electronics. There's no nothing. So it's not really a story, but more of an element. that I think would be interesting to play with.
Yeah, and the last game that we played together was the only time that I've ever played a game of this that had no weird or magical elements at all. It was completely realistic.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting experience for me. I've played a lot of games. I've never played any games with like sci-fi elements, but I have played games where things got weirdly magical at times, or that folklore played a big role.
Yeah.
And that changes the tone of the game so much.
Right.
And I would wonder what it would be like to intentionally fiddle with that dial, because it's not something that I've ever talked about before we sat down and play. It's just kind of been like, let's see how it goes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. What about you? What kind of story would you tell?
I wonder if I could tell the story of a nomadic community with this game, traveling across a big map. Like, I wonder if I could like have a scroll or tape a bunch of pieces of paper together and try to move across the map and see what my community could discover as they move, encountering new things and peoples and dealing with them. Or if the Oracle would be, I wonder if the Oracle would support that. I wonder if just general play would support that.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like that might be an interesting thing to, I wonder if I would feel more comfortable using like discovering things if I knew that my community was going to move away from it, even if it was good.
Yeah.
You know, if it's good, then I could make use of it for a little while, but eventually I would lose it. And if it's bad, then I would have to deal with it, but eventually move past it.
Yeah. I like that. I think it'd be cool to play like a nomadic tribe of people. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah, I'd like to toy around with that a little bit. So is there anything else that you want to say about The Quiet Year?
I really enjoyed it. It's a very simple pick up and kill 3 hours game. But really, you need a deck of cards and either tokens or, you know, popcorn, poker chips, some sort of visualization to be petty.
And D6s
and
for
some
the projects.
Yeah, and some D6s. Though, real talk, you don't actually need D6s. You could make tally marks. It would just be much messier.
Yeah. It's a wonderful game. It can be a very powerful game. It can be a very beautiful game. It's very good. I highly recommend it to everyone.
It is a very good game. It's simple and it's beautiful and it's good, and you should all play it.
The Farrier's Bellows is a production of The Gauntlet. You can find us on Twitter at GauntletRPG. You can find us on our website at gauntlet-rpg.com, and we are on Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet, where you can contribute to The Gauntlet and support more great shows like ours.
Thanks to our editor, Zach B. Also, you can find us on iTunes. Please rate and subscribe to us there. We would really, really appreciate it.
You can follow us on Twitter at Farrier's Bellows. Talk to us and talk about us. We would love to hear your thoughts on the show and on this game. You can find me on Twitter at ZWGarth.
And me at ICDiana.
I would also recommend that if this game sounds interesting to you, a few weeks back, we played a game of The Quiet Year for our actual play podcast, Heart Points. So you can find The Quiet Year on Heart Points. Because of some weird timey-wiminess, the audio of that game is probably going to come out before this, but we haven't finished playing it yet. So...
Timey-wimey Doctor Who.
Yeah.
That's a different genre.
But if you are interested in this game and want to see what it sounds like in play, I highly recommend checking that out at Heart Points.
Until next time, you cannot dream yourself into a character. You must hammer and forge yourself one.
Remember to prepare for the Frost Shepherds. They are on their way.